You will need lecture outline number 12, entitled Association and State Missions. For several lectures, we have been focusing on the Foreign Mission Board, the International Mission Board, international missions, and the larger world. But we have also stated that missions begins right here at home and then extends out into the world. And so it will be important for us to take at least a few moments and look closer to home. And we will do so in terms of associational missions and state missions. We'll begin with associational missions. And you'll remember from the historical materials that the first Baptist association that was established in North America was in 1707, the Philadelphia Baptist Association, a significant early association established in the South was the Charleston Association. Today, Baptist churches throughout the Southern Baptist Convention are gathered together into local associations, groupings of churches that work together in cooperative ministry, but also get together in terms of fellowship and in other ways. But the key word here for us is association. And when we begin to look at the significance and the meaning of this term, we begin to see at least part of the genius of Southern Baptist life and ministry. I do need to note that I hear a lot of conversation about regarding local associations, Baptist associations. The question is often asked, have they outlived their usefulness? Certainly, when you look at associations of churches, there are some that are more effective than others. In fact, that's, I guess, being a bit polite. There are some that seem almost dysfunctional and not operating at all as intended. And yet, if we look at the Baptist Association historically, it has played a significant role in the life of Southern Baptist churches. I looked for a definition of the term association. I was preparing some of these remarks when I was at home, and I didn't have a dictionary at hand. I began to look around, and I asked my wife, Donna, and she said, yes, Sarah has a dictionary on her shelf there in her room. Go grab that. I walked in there, and I found a dictionary, fairly large dictionary, and it was the Winston Dictionary. I had never seen it before. It was an old, battered copy, a large book, published in 1957. I don't know if the Winston Dictionary is even in publication today. My suspicion is that it is not. But I opened it up, looked up the term association, and I found exactly what I needed. The Winston Dictionary notes that identifies several related concepts concerning association. Number one, the act of joining together. Number two, the state of fellowship. Number three, a body of persons organized for a common object. And fourth, a connection of ideas. I would like to rephrase these concepts a bit and think through them with an emphasis on the way these concepts play out in associations of Baptist churches. That first concept, the act of joining together. Southern Baptist churches from the beginning, from the establishment of the convention in 1845, though the convention is made up of what we call autonomous local congregations with no denominational or no central ecclesiastical authority ruling over them, yet these autonomous local congregations do not stand alone. In fact, each Southern Baptist church is a part of a much larger whole. I've given you a flow chart of sorts there in the lecture outline. The local congregation is often a member of a local association, and again, that is a voluntary relationship, but most Southern Baptist churches, I think, have voluntarily joined their local associations. Those local associations, in turn, make up state conventions, which themselves are gathered together to make up the Southern Baptist Convention. And so the SBC is a denomination of state conventions, local associations, but at the foundation of it all are the individual local autonomous congregations. And then the Southern Baptist Convention itself is a part of the larger worldwide body of Baptists. And so when we talk about Southern Baptist churches, we must talk about relationships. That is, Southern Baptist churches exist in relationship to other Southern Baptist churches, and that relationship is found on a number of different levels. We do not relate to one another merely for the sake of creating some sorts of meaningless groups, but rather we associate with one another in order to attain together certain goals that we have in mind. Perhaps always remembering the truths that are found in these quotes, and I pull these from a cooperative program brochure that was printed a number of years ago. Helen Keller was quoted as saying, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." A quote from the book of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament, chapter 4, verse 9. "Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor." These are simply ways of explaining or affirming that often we can accomplish much more together than we can alone. And so Southern Baptists historically and typically have joined together. Our churches have joined together on a number of different levels in order to work together, to support the work together, to do things that perhaps individual churches would struggle to accomplish on their own. The second concept that we have found in our definition is that of the state of fellowship. We might recall the words of the psalmist in Psalm 119, verse 63. "I am a companion of all those who fear you and of those who observe your precepts," or commandments. Southern Baptist churches have historically joined together, not only for the purpose of doing things, but also for the purpose of enjoying and promoting fellowship. I don't know how your local association works, but I know growing up as a Southern Baptist, and I've certainly seen it in my adult life and ministry, that various local associations will host annual Christmas meals, fellowship meals and programs, or Easter programs, or Thanksgiving meals in which members of the local churches get together and celebrate together these holidays. Perhaps a local association around the 4th of July the churches will gather together in some sort of patriotic celebration. I know of local associations in the fall season that host annual wild meat banquets, particularly rural associations in which many of the men hunt and fish, and they'll come together at the end of the hunting season and bring the different meats that they have collected during the hunting season, and they'll barbecue them, roast them, grill them, cook them in various ways, and the churches of the association get together primarily to eat and to enjoy fellowship with one another. In Acts chapter 2, verse 42, and perhaps these were not a formally organized group of congregations at this point, and yet we read of the disciples that they continued steadfastly in the apostles' teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and the prayers. Southern Baptist churches 2,000 years later continue to walk together in this manner through associations of Baptist churches. We continue to eat together. We continue to fellowship together and to walk together. And so a third concept that we have discovered in our definition of association, in addition to the act of joining together, secondly, the state of fellowship, thirdly, a body of persons organized for a common object. Throughout the Bible, we see God's people at various levels organized to accomplish together what they could not do alone. Think about the encirclement of Jericho. This was not a single individual. It was not simply a small handful of individuals, but the entire nation of Israel gathered together to march around the city of Jericho over a number of days, and together they marched and brought about the fall of Jericho. Consider the building of the temple. All of Israel contributed to the building of the temple. The offerings were taken, and they brought their silver and their gold and other items for the building and the furnishings of the temple. Solomon engaged artisans and craftsmen of various sorts and backgrounds, and all together they brought their skills and their materials, their resources, brought them together and were able to build the temple. Only together were they able to do that. Could not have done that as individuals. Consider the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls under Nehemiah. Nehemiah could not perform the task by himself. Not even his family could have performed the task by itself, but rather it required the cooperative efforts of all those who had come back from the exile in Babylon and had resettled there in Jerusalem. In the New Testament, in Luke chapter 10, we read about the 70 who were sent out two by two. In the sending of Paul and Barnabas, and also the subsequent missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul, we've already noted this, that Paul understood the importance of the churches supporting him, not only financially, but in prayer, time and time again. He called upon the churches, wrote them, and pleaded with them to pray for the work. He understood that he did not stand alone. Even he and his companions were not alone, but rather they had the churches supporting them and encouraging them. Baptists have understood that there is strength in numbers, and we have been very deliberate on many different levels to join together, to walk together, and to work together in order to reach our objectives. There's yet a fourth concept that we have mentioned, and that is a connection of ideas, an association as a connection of ideas. The prophet Amos asked in chapter 3, verse 3 of his book, "Shall two walk together, or can two walk together, except they have agreed?" Historically, Baptists have understood that there must be doctrinal and theological commitment, consistency in order, agreement in order for us to walk together. This question that Amos asked in its own way is a rhetorical question. The answer is known. Of course, those who do not agree, they cannot walk together. But those who are agreed can walk together and help one another. Baptist associations historically have been, how shall I put it? It is the Baptist Association historically that in one sense has been the keeper of the faith. That is, those churches that have agreed to walk together in fellowship and with common goals and working together have done so largely because they have, first of all, been able to agree on the essentials of the faith and also on the ultimate goals of the churches. It is when churches have strayed from these commonly accepted essentials that Baptist churches and associations and even the denomination itself has run into problems. And at least historically, it seems to me that things are changing a bit today, but at least historically, when churches have strayed, particularly from the theologically accepted norm, that it has fallen to the associations to discipline those churches and to seek to restore them. In fact, here in Kentucky, in the years that I have been here, I know of at least one, and I think I can remember two instances in which local associations have sought to restore a church, each association seeking to restore a church in its own particular arena of life because of what was perceived as theological problems. And I know that at least on one occasion that because the church would not come back in line with commonly accepted theological norms, doctrines, that they were disfellowshipped. The church was disfellowshipped, recognizing that we cannot walk together unless we are able to agree on certain essential theological foundations. And again, historically, it has been the association that has handled these wayward churches, if we can use that terminology. So an association of Baptist churches might be thought of as a group of churches constantly asking themselves, are we agreed? And can we walk together? And so just to rehearse our definition and the related concepts, our definition of an association. An association, it is the act of joining together. It is the state of fellowship. It is a body of persons, or in our case, a body of churches organized together for a common object, for the attaining of common goals. And finally, a connection of ideas. A group of churches agreeing to walk together in theological agreement. We could give many contemporary illustrations. As I've had opportunity to preach in different Southern Baptist churches and also be involved in various associations around the denomination, I've already noted that I have personally seen associations that are strong and effective, others that seem almost dysfunctional. I think probably all of us can tell stories and give examples of both types and everything in between. For my church locally, it is a member of the Long Run Baptist Association. And as is typically the case, this is an association, a voluntary association of Southern Baptist churches. It is an association of churches that are found in 4 counties in and around Louisville, Kentucky. It has been in existence for nearly 200 years. It is an association of well over 160 churches. And in fact, I looked at a brochure that previously was published by the Long Run Baptist Association, and trying to answer the question, why should our church support Long Run Baptist Association? The answer that was given in that brochure, and there are 9 components to this answer. Number 1, participation in the larger household of faith. Number 2, Christian fellowship. 3, a wide united witness. 4, program resources and leadership development. 5, personal and professional development for ministers. 6, cooperative worldwide endeavors. 7, assistance with ordination. 8, support for ministers in times of crisis. 9, support of sister churches in special times. You have that list of answers before you in answer to the question, why should our church support this particular association? And I do not want to, and I will not get into a discussion of whether this association or that association is effective or is a good association or a bad association. Exactly what role should this or that church play in a particular association. But just thinking generally and conceptually, it does seem to me that the question that is asked in this brochure is a legitimate question. And you can fill in the blank. Why should our church, why should my church support, fill in the blank, whatever association it is? Why should my church be a part of and be a member of and support our local association? I think that this is a fairly decent answer to the question. And think for just a moment, as you look over those answers, think for a moment how each of these matters fit into the 4-part definition of association that we have given in this lecture. The act of joining together. look at answer number 1, participation in the larger household of faith. We talked about how local Southern Baptist churches are typically parts of local associations, themselves parts of state conventions, part of the Southern Baptist Convention, and the convention itself a part of the worldwide body of believers. Participation in the larger household of faith. The second component of our definition, the state of fellowship, stated very explicitly in the brochure. Why should my church support its association? Because it provides an arena of broader Christian fellowship. The third component of our definition, a body of persons organized for a common object. Well, I'll not read all of these, but just glance at answers 3, 4, and 5, and 6, and also answers 8 and 9. Each of these, in their own way, are connected to this third component of our understanding of an association. We are able to do together what perhaps we cannot do alone, or perhaps we're able to do better together what we are not able to do so well individually. And so we band together to provide a wide, united witness, to provide leadership development and so forth and so on, support in times of crisis and so forth. And then that final component of our definition, a connection of ideas. And I guess in its own way, this fourth component is actually assumed or implied in all of these answers as a foundation, because only the churches that are agreed theologically and doctrinally can enjoy fellowship together, can genuinely unite together to accomplish certain goals and purposes. But specifically, number 7 in the answer to the question, assistance with ordination. You will know that in any ordination council that one of the key components of that council is the questioning of the candidate as to his theological positions. And so local associations of churches are often invited, the churches in the association invited to that council, and often participate to some degree or another. And so, why should my church support its local association? I'll let you provide your own answers. I don't know if your local association is particularly effective or not, whether it is a strong association or not. That is a question that only you and your church can answer. But I will tell you that historically, associations of local churches have played important roles within the Southern Baptist Convention. Many ministries carried out cooperatively. I've given you a list. I'm not going to read these in the outline. I've given you a list of the types of ministries that the Long Run Baptist Association supports and the churches are involved in. Perhaps you could provide a similar list within your own association. Often it is the case also that local associations will sponsor annual offerings, missions offerings. We have, with the International Mission Board, the annual Lottie Moon Christmas offering for international missions received during the Christmas season. For North American missions and the North American Mission Board, there is the Annie Armstrong offering for North American missions taken in the spring. Taken up in the spring. Oftentimes, associations will take up annual offerings at different times of the year to support the work in the local association. And then we might also just touch on very quickly the concept of state missions. You think back to our flow chart of Baptist associations or Baptist relationships. Individual believers congregated together into churches parts of local associations, and those local associations making up state conventions, which then form the Southern Baptist Convention. The state conventions are, in some way, it seems to me, a larger version of the local associations. As Baptist churches group themselves together on the local level in associations, so they group themselves together on a statewide level or a regional level and together support, fund, and support and participate in various ministries on the state level. Again, I am not going to engage in a debate or a conversation about the effectiveness of state conventions. Certainly not going to try to evaluate this state convention or that state convention as to its effectiveness. But again, state conventions are a very real, are very much a reality historically and even today in the life of the Southern Baptist Convention. And oftentimes, the state conventions will be involved in and giving oversight and support to ministries and to entities on a broader scale than the local associations. Oftentimes, at least historically, it is the state conventions that have been largely involved in the establishment and the support of Baptist hospitals, of Baptist colleges and universities. Most state conventions have assembly grounds, camps and conference centers, homes for children. Many state conventions, I suspect all state conventions, operate Baptist state papers and so forth and so on. And so, again, we understand that we as Baptists, particularly we as Southern Baptists, have often and even today continue to understand the need for cooperatively supporting the work of missions, cooperatively doing the work of missions. And this sort of cooperation, this sort of walking together, takes place on a number of different levels. The individual believers in the local congregations, the local congregations in associations, and so forth and so on. We're going to turn from our consideration of association and state missions now to, in our next lecture, to consideration of the North American Mission Board. I've given you a good bit of information on the International Mission Board. We need to keep in mind, again, that our own country and our own North America remains a great mission field. And Southern Baptists, from the beginning, established the Home Mission Board, which today is known as the North American Mission Board, to focus on missions closer to home in North America as opposed to international missions. And in our next lecture then, we will turn to this focus.